Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We have a very special guest. I have no idea how to say your last name.
Pachasa.
Pachasa, okay, because it's been Chachi to me ever since I've known you.
You bet.
But you're, we've had you on before with, you actually just brought up with John Troxel, the former SEAC, and we talked about a lot of stuff, leadership and stuff. You actually run, in addition to the work you do with Black Rifle, which we'll get into in a few minutes, you run a leadership school or a leadership academy. What do you call it?
So SEAC Troxel and I put together a leadership academy in addition to leadership consulting and things of that nature. But he and I just want to get past some of the platitudinal stuff and get to the meat of what leadership is and get it to the masses. So many people can't afford it. So we're putting together a program that, you know, the lowest private can afford to do this, or their units can afford to have us.
And when you say, avoid the platitudinal stuff, I mean, I assume you're talking about the rah-rah, 3-sentence paragraph about how you should organize your life bullshit.
Right. You know, there's and they're all great companies, not trying to take any, but they all do the same stuff. They all teach the same motivational thing, which ends up being fleeting, right? So what are they giving of substance? What have they created that's going to make their lives better? And that's what John and I have put together. Pretty exciting.
Well, I mean, you couldn't get two better guys to do it, to be honest.
I appreciate that.
Not to blow smoke up your ass, but you've got a pretty storied career in leading young men, especially. I mean, that's what we do.
You bet.
We turn teenagers into men.
Absolutely.
Really, which is something that's we're in short supply these days. I was just talking last night to some people about this, and I've racked my brain, and just in the broader Western society, but particularly here in America, I don't see the rites of passage anymore, right? That where a young man now knows he's a man,
right?
It's completely absent.
Well, and then it goes back to I've got 3 kids, like 17, 8, and 2. Like, you know, the job of a parent isn't to remove obstacles from their kids' path. It's to give them the skills to help them overcome those obstacles. Right. And I think that's what more young adults need for that passage.
Well, it's resilience,
into manhood.
Right? Yeah,
absolutely.
It's so Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt say this in The Coddling of the American Mind. Prepare your children for the road. Don't prepare the road for your children.
100%.
Right. I think that's a really profound statement. And I do understand it. The idea, I'm not a parent. I've got a stepkid. I'm not a parent myself, but I understand the idea of loving someone and not wanting to see them in pain. I get it. Yep. Right. But safetyism as it is these days, I mean, you're essentially just delaying the pain, right? Like I'm gonna stop you from experiencing a little bit of pain right now, but down the road you're gonna experience way more pain.
You know, and I'm quite honestly probably one of the biggest perpetrators of being a helicopter parent, right? So I've had to purposefully get out of my own way to let my kids suffer.
Because you're a man, you have like the purpose of masculinity is to provide and protect, and it's a fine line between shielding them from the world and protecting them in the long term by letting them learn lessons and things like that.
And there was a phrase I heard just a couple weeks ago. It says, if you raise your children, you can play with your grandchildren. But if you play with your children, you'll raise your grandchildren.
That's a really good thought. Yeah, I like that.
And that was so simplistically profound that just in the recent weeks, I've been tougher on my kids based on that very premise.
Yeah, I mean, I like this idea of leadership because I think it's one of the primary things that's missing in American culture these days. One of the principles of this show is that no matter where I am, I'll be a leader, right? And then the second part of that is as a leader, I will eat last,
sure,
right? Like I like to do, I mean, maybe this is just the 82nd Airborne indoctrination, you know what I mean? But I like to task and goal-oriented stuff. If you're going nowhere, that's exactly where you're going to get. So you got to have a plan, right? You have to have a plan. I have to know what my benchmarks are, and I have to know when I've hit them, and then what phase 2, 3, 4 of that plan is, so on and so forth. And it all, from my perspective, leadership is about it's about training force multipliers. In the military, it's training force multipliers to be able to do combat better. In life, it's training force multipliers to be able to for our society to be better, right?
Sure.
And so from your perspective, you talk about leadership a lot. It's kind of your job actually to do
Sure.
that. So take me through some of the platitudes that you don't like and what you would replace them with.
So there's a number one, you just have to start with the definition of leadership. And we could talk about this for hours upon end because there's it's so cliche now that you could be a retired E9 from the military and you're going to start a leadership company, which is exactly what I did, right? So I'm part of that mechanism. Other than you really have to explore what leadership is in its purest form. Like what does that look like? What does that feel like? How do you define it? And what I've settled on is you can't define leadership, right? Because you could try and define leadership, but that would be akin to trying to define love.
Correct. Yeah, because it means something different
It
to
means
everybody
something different, and
in
there's-
every different circumstance.
Absolutely.
Well,
Like the way that I love my kids is the way that I differently than I love my wife or my pets or my brother or my parents or my best friends or teammates, right? These are all different kinds of love.
Right.
And there's different kinds of leadership. But the cool part in peeling this onion is that leadership is a lot like love insofar as it is a byproduct. It is a byproduct of a connection that we have with another individual at a bare minimum, if not team, right? But in order to get that, in order to get that connection, you need successful engagements. In order to have successful engagements, you need to speak inside the construct of a communication mechanism that makes sense.
Right.
Perfect
Yeah.
example from our world and your history with JT is I'm writing a book with a retired Air Force colonel, A-10 pilot, essentially titled "Why an Airstrike is the Perfect Conversation." It's like, why do airstrikes work all the time,
Right.
every time, with hardly any hiccups? You kill the enemy. You hardly ever so amazingly rarely hit a friendly force or a civilian and all that stuff because we're trained to have this amazing conversation. We're attacking the conversation from two different viewpoints, but we're able to engage because we know the fundamentals of that interaction. But going back to the thing, so leadership is a byproduct of that connection. And so like leaders fail all the time because if you were to show up battalion, be like, hey, I care about you. So tell me your life story. Okay, cool. Go clean the latrine.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like it's almost an active listening kind of situation, right? Where you're this is something that I see as pervasive throughout failures in leadership, but also internally about people's identity in the West. Now, it used to be very clear who we were and what we were meant to do. Right.
Fair.
And now for a variety of different reasons, life is more complicated now. There's more choices, so there's more possibility to make a bad one, right? But there's also the paralysis by analysis situation where people can't figure out, like, there's too many options. They have a problem distilling it down. And when I think about leadership like that, or any other kind of maxim in our lives, if you're having trouble with the definition, particularly if it's for you personally, ultimately it boils down to what the intent is, right? Like, what am I trying to accomplish with this?
Well, yeah. So I would say realistically, leadership is just caring, right? Because you can manage people, you can tell them to do something. That's authoritarian. You're getting them to do something, and that's authoritarian or that's management. But if you care, then that can be leadership. So you can't be a leader if you don't care. Now, what you care about, that becomes a very nebulous concept. Or if you don't have the metal tasks to be a leader, like if let's say you're a narcissist and I teach you leadership principles, I just created a master manipulator.
Right.
Because you don't have the fundamental skills required to be a leader.
Right.
And this is something that John and I are exploring. So many people, leadership is beyond them because they don't care or they don't care about the right stuff. They don't care about that human being,
Right.
or they're holding on to legacy, archaic military bullshit that died long ago, but they haven't evolved past it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like it's like intent versus like the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law,
Sure.
right? I mean, you
Sure,
got to.
sure.
Yeah. This is another function of our failure in society is teaching people what to think instead of how to think, right?
Completely.
And it's a huge misunderstanding that a lot of people have about the military, where it's like everybody's brainwashed and trained to think alike. That's not true at all.
No.
Like if you're in the military and you find yourself in a situation where the command is more concerned with uniformity than resilience and flexibility, then you're in a bad command, in my opinion. And it happens a lot, particularly in the big army, right?
Sure.
Because people are risk averse. They're afraid of they need the OER that looks clean to get their next promotion. And, that isn't just their fault, frankly, because the system incentivizes that type of behavior.
Oh, completely.
So That is a systemic issue in leadership, not just in the military, but
Right.
in families, in the corporate world. And it's got to be something that you tear down. And that's why I say you have to bring it back to intent,
Completely.
right? That's the only way that any of this works.
Well, and then leaders need to run with scissors, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you know
You
where
gotta
you're
take some
running,
chances,
and
yeah.
you absolutely do, right? I mean, shit, run with scissors. Take some risks. Take the capabilities of your amazing team and take it for a test drive. See what happens.
Yeah, for
Beautiful
sure.
shit happens.
Like, how else? I just don't see any other way to do it. Otherwise, you're stuck in the mud. And, it's not to be too flippant about it, but it's like that. It's like that scene in Apocalypse Now where he's in the hotel room and he's like, Charlie's out in the jungle getting stronger.
Right.
But that's the reality of the situation. And, as an infantryman, I am taught to every increment of time I spend at a location to continuously fortify my position. Like if I'm going to be there for an hour, I set up a perimeter and maybe an LP. If I'm going to be there for a day, I dig a ranger grave and put my trucks around me or whatever it is. You know what I mean? And you just keep progressing from that period. But we don't really do that much. You know what I mean? We kind of just stand still a lot, which seems like a problem.
And again, I think your podcast is phenomenal. Like, so many people are afraid to speak up, or so many people are having to kowtow to this weird, super loud minority
Right, yeah.
of the people who are driving so many things. But it really is crazy because in a leadership sense, in a wartime sense, in a combat sense, the practical application of leadership is not difficult, but it is complex.
Mm-hmm.
But you just have to care about people. But again, the job of the military isn't to make sure soldiers never get shot at.
Right. That would be insane.
Right.
But that's not a military.
Right. So like a lot of the mentality and modality of contemporary America is leaning that way. Like,
Safetyism, yeah, it's a big problem, right?
Gosh.
Yeah. All right, we're back for real this time. So it's not tracking your face anymore. It just puts a little box over it. It isn't actually tracking your face. Anyways, we should be all good now because I'm incompetent. Anyways, yeah, I like that thing you said about the grandkid thing. I've never really thought about it like that, but it does show how, like any other institution in society, it's a muscle, right?
You bet.
And if you don't work it out, if you don't flex it from time to time, it goes away. Liberty's like that. Like the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. Yeah,
Absolutely.
So it's like,
and like people, there's value in suffering.
sure,
There's
yeah,
value
yeah.
in knowing what you can tolerate, where your limits are. My wife and I are doing the cold bath now in our pool that's like 38 degrees. But I went in that first day, it was like a minute. By the end of the week, I was in there for 22 minutes.
Yeah.
Just hanging out, right? But I never thought that was my capacity. I never knew it. I was like, I'm never doing that. But
Well, how do you know, right?
right.
You never know.
And so like my kids, like I want them to fail. Absolutely want them to fail, because again, it's so cliche now. It's absolutely like you don't succeed or fail, you succeed or learn.
Right, yeah.
If you have the presence of mind in which to do so.
Well, what's the God? I can't remember who it was that said this. It was maybe a former first lady, or maybe it was Madeleine Albright. It was some female involved in politics, but she said this thing we call failure is not the falling down, but the staying down, right? And if we're in the gym and we hit muscle failure, we're like, all right, cool. I'm going to come back. I'm going to take a minute off, come back next week or whatever. But when people have ideas, or when they start businesses or whatever else is going on, or even in personal relationships now, and I found myself in the past guilty of this as well, when things start to go bad, you're like, oh, I guess this is just fucked. instead of how I treat everything else in my life, which is, oh, that didn't work, I'm going to turn this way. Like if you were walking down a path and the path ran out, you wouldn't just fucking lie down on the ground and die. That's fucking stupid, right?
And the ego, I got kicked off of a deployment in the spring of 2001 in Bosnia.
Oh, shit.
I got kicked off of a soft deployment. I was an E5, whole long story. But there were a couple years that I floundered just trying to figure out who Tim Pachasa was, or what. And I wish somebody would have taught me this. I had to learn this. It took me years to learn this, is that, to your very point, is if I stopped, I had that failure point. Boom, that happened, right? I got kicked out of a country. If I stopped any endeavor past that, I would have solidified that as a failure.
Sure, yeah,
But
absolutely.
on any timeline past that point where I endeavor to do better and learn, I switch that from a failure to a setback. if I have the presence of mind in which to do so.
Right.
It took me years to do that. So, but then now, like, that was not a failure. That was an amazing setback that I had.
And you get to decide too, which is the important part.
Absolutely. And or like this, or in society, you have a choice, Tim or Tor. You can choose to be a victim, or you can choose to be a victor. But it's got to be deliberate, and that is on you.
And you got to put the work in too. And that's kind of what this show is all about. I mean, we're not going to vote our way out of the problems we've caused at this point. It's just
we're going to have to shoot our way out.
We may have to, at some point. And it's like, people see this as like, I don't tell the people this to criticize them or anything like that, but we are the author of our own calamity here. We've done this to ourselves.
Agreed.
We have, instead of what Ben Franklin warned us about, sacrificing liberty for security, we sacrifice liberty for convenience, which is a far dumber thing to do, but perhaps makes more sense. I think it's a little bit easier to look a temporary security issue in the face and say, nah, fuck that, than it is to put down all the things in my life that make it more efficient, because I know that there's a cost to be paid for that, right? Like, people aren't just going to stop using products made in China. And maybe you can't, I don't know, unless you just decide to go live in the woods.
She's been amazing. She looks and scrutinizes, and so she's been amazing. But to your very point is that they're not. So convenience has really taken over everything, and I'm guilty of it to a large degree. I'm aware of it, and even me being aware, still in a lot of cases, isn't enough to curb my behavior from that. But again, for a lot of good reasons, we got to where we are. But again, we've identified a problem, but no one's excited about fixing the problem.
Well, because
it's inconvenient.
Yeah, it is extremely inconvenient. Not just. I mean, I have I don't think the federal government should exist. I tell people this all the time, and they look at me like I'm crazy. But for you personally, if the federal government just evaporated, it wouldn't affect your life very much. And I don't mean you specifically, but for most people, it would not affect their lives. And in the ways it did affect their lives, we could find solutions for that. And it's the same way with weaning ourselves off of some of this convenience. I think it's a really important, in the same way that subjecting yourself rather to some short-term pain can really prove beneficial. Making things a little bit more inconvenient for yourself can do the same, I think, right?
Well, this weird Orwellian society that we're building, right? We're seeing the tangible results of the book 1984 playing out, right? We're seeing, if we don't like, and again, not to be hypercritical of the current president, right? But it's hard not to.
Yeah.
Is like, we've had 2 quarters of, we didn't grow in 2 quarters. That constitutes a recession. They're like, no, that's not a recession. Rewriting the dictionary to redefine what that looks like is in and of itself bad. And there was a phenomenal meme I saw a couple days ago of 2 lions. One was caged in a zoo, and one was free roaming the savannah. It was like, one of these has free healthcare. One of these is given 2 to 3 meals a day. One of these is free this, and the one caged up, and then the other one has none of those securities, but is free.
Right. Yeah.
So how free are you if you're reliant on the government for every single thing that you do?
Yeah, but the really interesting part about this is that people aren't reliant on the federal government. They think they are because that's what they've been told.
Right.
But it's not true, because I challenge people all the time. Explain to me specifically how your life would alter if the federal government just didn't exist. You know what I mean? Like, there would be some infrastructure would be built in the same way it was during feudalist Europe, right? Private wardens or whomever else would build that shit because they needed to make their industry better. You know what I mean?
And
we would just people seem to think that if the federal government didn't exist, we would just move back into caves and that'd be the end of it. We just give up. Like, no, that's not how people work, man.
And again, I'm a fan of a lot of social programs. I have a special needs niece, right? And so there are a lot of things that she's reliant on. And so I'm glad that we have some mechanism that we have to provide for that person. But again, like my daily life in and of itself does not require federal government.
Right.
There are a lot of people, though, who are actively choosing to go on government programs, whether it's government assistance or jobs or like welfare. And again, there are people out there who are struggling, not trying to insult them or doing that.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of Americans today are now too good to work.
Yeah.
Right? With the minimum wage, like, the government will give me $15 an hour if I just stay home. Why do I need to go out and put in any sweat equity for that same $15?
Well, because there's no equity at the end of that transaction because it's the government doing it, right?
You bet.
Like this is something that I try to tie together for people a lot. The same nihilism that drives people to be suicidal or mass shooters or gang members or terrorists, it's the same thing, right? They don't feel ownership in anything around them, their country, their community. They don't own their homes. They don't feel a sense of upward mobility in their career. All these things lead you to believe, like, hey, no matter what I do, I'm going to fail, so fuck this, right?
Right.
And then people stop working. And like any other physical object, when the bulk of people at the lower level stop functioning, then everything collapses. And this is something that's happened in every major society in the history of this world. And somehow the aristocracy still runs on the same game plan.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think they hope that, well, at this time we'll actually be able, and this is what pisses me off about globalism, because it used to be that somebody would come stop you, right? Like if you're Hitler trying to take over all of Europe, somebody's going to come stop you. If you're China trying to expand into different places, or if you're Russia trying to expand communism, somebody will come fight you there. But when the power is global, are we going to wait for aliens to come save us? You know what I mean?
Right.
But people will fight back, because they always do. You know what I mean? And that's the thing about this. It seems very myopic, and it always works in kind of the same direction, where the aristocracy tries to convince as many people with basic functionality in society to be on their side, so that there's an infrastructure to fight back against dissent, right? Like the communists and the fascists are well known for instituting these what is essentially like rat on your neighbors programs, or even on your families, right? And that's kind of what you saw in, not so much in the U.S., a little bit in New York, I guess, but in Canada during the pandemic bullshit. Like people were just ratting each other out for like, you went outside of your house without a mask, and I'm like, yeah, because it's fucking fresh air, dude.
Right.
But
Canada's going crazy.
I don't know how you fight back against. This is one thing I haven't really figured out yet, and maybe there's no figuring out. Maybe it just happens that the kettle boils over at some point, and it's just a natural part of society that the fighting back happens. But it seems like the longer you wait to retaliate against authoritarianism, the more people get hurt.
You know, I'm an optimist, and I'm a glasses half full kind of guy. You know, the 60s and 70s seemed to be pretty gnarly.
Oh yeah.
Right. But then it seemed to self-correct, which gave us the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, I think that was mostly cocaine that did that. Yeah.
I said that in a speech a few months ago. Like, right? Like, thanks for all the neon and cocaine 80s.
Yeah.
But
the DeLorean too.
Yeah,
Don't forget about the DeLorean.
Like epic win right there. But you know, so I'm seeing the tide, people trying to turn, and I think our salvation rests with comedians, because they have that free pass to speak truth to power.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and so, you know, as much as
I mean, it's intrinsic to the process for them to speak
absolutely,
that way. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so watching just the absolute bipolar love and hatred for Dave Chappelle is absolutely unreal. But again, he delivers comedy in a very clean, good way that gets people thinking and brings up valid points. So I'm very thankful for that. I have a cousin who 5 years ago sent me a text about when Trump was getting elected and all that stuff. She called me a racist.
Oh yeah.
Like she's like, I can't believe this. If da. Meanwhile, my oldest son is homosexual and I think trans, right? As far as this goes, and that's fine. But again, it's, you know, I have opinions that, like, freedom means getting pissed off from time to time.
Yeah.
If we want freedom, I need to be offended, and just because you're offended doesn't make you right.
Yeah.
It kind of makes you a bitch on a whole lot of levels.
Yeah. And you're certainly not entitled to be offended.
Right.
Well, I mean, I guess you're entitled to be offended if you want, but you're not entitled to expect anybody to care.
Absolutely. And,
right?
and like today, like whenever like, oh, well, he's not going to issue an apology. Good on him. People can suck it, right? If you don't like what I say, you know, fine, so be it. You're not entitled. Like, I have my opinion. If you disagree, that's fine. That's what grown adults do. Or I'm sorry, specifically, adults can disagree and not let it automatically rise to conflict.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, we go straight to conflict every single time these days. It's ridiculous.
Well, you know, I think I think about this a lot, And I don't think that it's just that things are so agitated and politicized now. I think that we robbed the younger generations of low-level conflict resolution.
Amen.
Right? Like learning how to solve things with your words first and then maybe your fists, and then get on to the other business if you need to. But usually it's just not necessary to do that.
Like, and then to that point, because everybody got a participation trophy, nobody knew how to lose.
Yeah.
Nobody learned how to deal with that angst. No one learned what it's like when somebody on your team loses the game for you, or when you lose the game for your team, and having to look them at and because they didn't get those
and take
skills
accountability for
and
it
take
too,
accountability,
yeah.
and because they didn't lack those skills, then they get frustrated as an adult and then go grab a rifle.
Yeah, but in the same way that you reach muscle failure or tear fascial tissue to rebuild it, those moments are, I hate to sound cliche about it, but they're not even just teachable moments. Just experiencing that shit is really important, is a really important part of the process of becoming a human being.
Completely.
You know what I mean? Like a 6-year-old child is not a functioning human being.
You bet.
That is, they're a sponge soaking up whatever the fuck you do, right? And whatever you say, which is scary sometimes, right? It's a lot of responsibility, but look, we've been fucking up raising kids for as long as people have been raising kids.
Completely.
And that's just how it is. People get super anxious about it. Like, oh, you can do everything right and it still ends up bad. It's like, yeah, sometimes. What are you going to do?
You can't win. I hardly have one friend who doesn't have a complaint about their parents in some way, shape, or form, that they did or didn't do this, or this did or didn't happen for them. And everyone's got childhood trauma because childhood's traumatic.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I mean, you're a lot of things are happening to you and you don't understand most of them. That's got to suck,
Right. Yeah. You don't understand, nor do you have the cognitive ability to understand.
Yeah.
It's like you can't even like the biggest part in life is just having a good vocabulary to explain what you're going through.
Right.
Like talk through. Like, I'm mad at you. No, you're just hungry.
Yeah,
you know, but that's it. Like, okay, but perhaps that's it. Like, kids can't do that, and so they suffer not in silence, right? But going through that, but they lack the cognitive ability, they lack the vocabulary. It's tough. And now life meets them at such an early age because of the internet. Then before, there were years and years before they had to experience or see some of these things, and now it's meeting them in their single digits.
Yeah, but people are facing more complex situations earlier in life, but they're maturing later in life.
Yes.
At the same time. It's like our current economic issue where we're experiencing inflation and a recession at the same time. This is what happened in the 1970s, right? That's not good. Usually it's one or the other.
Sure.
You either experience inflation or you experience a recession, depression, or whatever it is. When you do both, you're fucked, right? And it's even more complex when you're talking about a human life and trying to just figure out who you are in the world.
You bet.
And then try to contribute, in a way. Because I think people want to feel a sense of purpose. Certainly, it's intrinsic to our species. The problem is it goes through the filter of your brain. Like an ant knows how to be an ant and what the job is immediately when it's born, and that's just how it is, right? For its entire life. But sometimes people don't really figure out until who they are and what they're about and what they really want to do until midlife or later sometimes, right?
I was 36.
Yeah, so it's like, what?
And I think I was already in E8 until I found out what my true passion was. And I was a career TAC-P and JTAC, and I love my job. And for all intents and purposes, I was doing great at my job. And it was fine. I was going through and I was happy, and I didn't know any better until I found my passion. That it's very difficult to do anything else that's not your passion once you figure it out.
What was it? I'm assuming your passion is teaching about leadership and leading, right? So what was it? What was it exactly that clicked for you, and how? Like, did you see bad leadership? You're like, I can fix this, or what was it?
So I had a commander who was just dreadful, and then the E9, the chief, was just as bad, if not worse. And the combination of those two at the same time, and time again, they kept letting me down, and I kept expecting them to do better, and it never happened. So finally, I had to have a talk with myself, and I was like, Tim, why am I expecting them to do better when I know they're incapable of it? because that's that, the definition of insanity, right? And I was like, why am I expecting this of them? And then it was, hey, what is an expectation? And I shit you not, I've thought about the word expectation every day for the past 11 years since then. And it took me 4 years to define it, because everyone says, manage expectations and set solid expectations. There's not one person on the planet who can tell me what an expectation is, who can point to a definition. Because in the dictionary, it says the act or state of expecting, then it says see assumption. Then you look up assumption, is like the act or state of assuming, see expectation. Yep. And then you look at that with, anticipation or assumption, like I call it the triangle of fuckery, where these all define different words, but it never gets to the root. Yeah. And then my whole life now revolves around an expectation and understanding what expectations are and how to communicate that.
So what is it?
So an expectation is the thought or belief that an act or event will occur based on credible levels of information and or credible levels of past experience. And the kicker to this was, and I really didn't learn, and I've been studying this for like 4 or 5 years at the time, and I was a CSM, for lack of a better term, at Joint Mace, McGuire-Dix Lakehurst. And then I realized that every one of our emotions is based off of an expectation. If I'm happy about something, it exceeded my expectation.
Which means, by the way, that it's all relative.
You bet.
Too.
You bet.
Like there's no iron law for experiential stuff.
Right.
It's not like I get 20 grams of sugar and the rest of my day is going to just be better now. You know what I mean? It would be nice if it worked that way, if it was like a very simple formula, but the reality is that it's mostly about setting the expectation, which is, if you follow it too far down, it sounds almost like a scientific hypothesis, right?
For everything that we do.
Right. But it's more than that, because there's it's multivariate, because hope and distress both play a role in that.
So hope is my bottom tier. So it goes from hope to assumption to anticipation to expectation.
Right.
And these are all growing things that we can go toward, right? So let's say here it is, the end of the football season. Oh, wow, my Cleveland Browns did not make the playoffs, right? Am I upset? No. My expectation was they would not, based on the past 30 years of the Browns being the Browns, right? So, but a few years ago when they did make the playoffs, I was ecstatic because they exceeded my expectations. Or if they don't meet it, and that's and the problem with the Browns is not that they suck as a team, because they've always been good and competitive, but they always Browns themselves in the last 2 minutes of the game and snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Because I go into the game knowing they're going to lose, and then they show that they can win, and then they're about to win, and then they piss it away somehow, and it adjusts my expectation, and now I'm butthurt when that wasn't my expectation going into it.
But this isn't a reason to artificially lower your expectations just so that you'll be pleasantly surprised, right?
No,
because that's loser bullshit.
It's funny. It's like I have a nickname for those people. They're called losers, right? So if they're and again, if you're like, well, if I lower my expectations of everybody, I'll never be disappointed.
I guess
you suck, right? You just suck as
fuck?
A human being, right? So that's a
that's
shitty way to
nihilism.
go through life.
That's nihilism.
Absolutely. Or when people say, "Hey, I'll under promise and over deliver," that at face value is a better understanding of it. But what you miss is a true capacity for work.
Right. Yeah.
Right. To understand what your people do in some way, shape, or form.
As a businessman, I like to set expectations precisely where I think I can reach, but internally for my team, I set it 20% higher or more.
Sure.
Right. Like here's what I know we can do, and here's what we'll deliver. And to my team, I'm like, we're going to do better than what we told them we're going to do. That's not for outside consumption. For a person, that's your internal drive. Right.
Yeah, and I'm the biggest fan of BHAGs, right? Big, hairy, audacious goals. Yeah. Have those by all means. But again, because like people say like high or low expectations. If you have a high or low expectation, you don't have an expectation.
Right.
You should only deal in realistic versus unrealistic expectations.
I mean, if you're submitting a white paper for funding from a university to do research on something, and you are using these very, I wouldn't even struggle to call them illogical, but certainly unreasonable and unfact-driven hypotheses, high or low expectations. If you did get the money the first time, you certainly wouldn't get it the second or third if you're that far off base.
You bet.
You know what I mean? So, and it's like a pendulum. You know, the more it swings, the longer it takes to come to equilibrium. You know what I mean? The farther it pulls back, the wider the swings are and the longer it takes to reach the point where you actually want to be.
Absolutely.
And it's, it's not an argument not to take big risks, obviously, but you should be realistic about things. You know
Sure.
what I mean? And part of that realism, in my opinion, is knowing when you're out of your depth and when you need help, whether it's in research, education, learning how to fight gunfights, or whether it's business, or whether it's your personal mental health, right?
Sure.
You have to know when you're out of your depth. Stop self-diagnosing and talk to people that actually know what the fuck is going on.
Yeah,
Preferably somebody who has been where you are now and is now at the place where you want to be, right?
The world is filled with people who've had sex twice who now think that they're a porn star. Right. And like, just stop. You've gotten laid twice, right? You need a few more reps. You need a few more partners before we do that. And so like that is pervasive throughout everything that we see. Like just take a step back, have some some self-reflection, take an honest look at what's at play. And again, if you don't know, just have that conversation. Like, well, I don't know. Like you may not know how big of a risk you're taking. There's no problem with that.
Sure.
Just give yourself the capacity to debrief that after the fact and not beat yourself up too much about it.
Yeah, and it's definitely, part of just having no appetite for discomfort at all. And I think people don't even want to be wrong about things, and they will believe a lie that they think is true or that they said rather than admit they were wrong and move on to the truth. It's bizarre to me because literally everything you were wrong about all the way up until the point that you knew it. And that is true for you, and it's true for every person that's ever existed and ever will exist. So why would that be such a difficult thing for people to accept? I don't understand it personally.
So I have an analogy for being wrong.
Okay.
And people have said, like, Chachi, this could be your best idea ever, right? So let's say that you're going to come to my house in Phoenix, Arizona, and I'm going to cook you chicken breast. And I cook some chicken breast, put it in front of you. It's golden, it's seasoned, looks great. You cut right through it. In the middle is that weird opaque purple, kind of raw.
Yeah.
And you're like, hey, Chachi, with my Mark I calibrated eyeball here, I can see that this chicken breast is 51% cooked.
Yeah.
Can you put it back on the grill? I'm like, no. It's cooked.
The timer said it's good, so it's good.
Yeah, you're like, no. You're like, I get that it's 51% cooked, but there's a whole lot of raw chicken here. I'm like, yeah. By your own words, it's more cooked than it is raw.
Sure, yeah.
So chow down. So I think we all see the lunacy in that argument.
Yeah, it's stupid.
But that's what we do when we're right and wrong. The minute we're more right than we are wrong, we hoist a flag, we declare a winner,
Spike the football,
discount, double check, spike
Yeah.
the football, and we never acknowledge the percentage of wrong that we bring or eat that raw chicken.
Yeah.
Right. And we make so many people eat raw chicken because we are rarely, if ever, 100% about right about anything. So what is our capacity to have that conversation? So like if I'm a Garrison CSM, could I be 90% right about something and ignore the 10% of wrong that I brought to the conversation if it would make my unit or my base or my installation that much better? Or should I have that capacity for that 10%? And I think I should.
Well, there's a lot of things involved there, right? I mean, ego is a big part of it.
Completely.
Pride of authorship, generally speaking, is something that people have an issue with. And, I don't know. It seems like there are social forces at work to stop people from being gracious in defeat as well. So like if you all of a sudden find new evidence or somebody makes a compelling argument about something that changes your mind on something, particularly on something political, you're a flip-flopper now. You're a sellout. You're this or that. It's like, okay, I mean, you shouldn't be jumping from pedal to pedal. But, if somebody comes to you, so I remember when Ken Ham, he's the guy that does the Creation Museum in Kentucky, where people are riding dinosaurs and shit, which is an interesting idea. Would love to do it myself, but doesn't seem likely it ever happened. He was debating Bill Nye, who's not even a scientist. He's a mechanical engineer. But, they asked the two of them, the moderator asked the two of them, it was a debate about evolution, right? And the moderator asked both of them, what would it take for you to change your opinion on this? And Ken Ham said, nothing will change my opinion because this is what I believe from the Bible. And Bill Nye said evidence, right? And this isn't about religion. It's like Paul said in the Bible, study all things and hold fast to what is true. He didn't say blindly follow all of this. You know what I mean? Which is interesting because a lot of people do that. And not just in religion. When there's no religion around, people will create that shit. Because right now it's like climate change is religion for people. They think that the world is fucking ending. And I promise you it is not.
No, and then like for me, this ends up, I like amongst friends. I don't talk about war. I don't talk about politics. I don't talk about religion because most people lack the emotional intelligence to have these conversations. Now the problem is it's not their opinion; it's their beliefs.
Right. Yeah.
I can change an opinion with enough facts, but if it's a belief system, that's really, really difficult to take a crack at. So I just don't want to engage stupid people. And again, not like very intelligent people, but who can't concede any point whatsoever.
Sure, yeah. And, my buddy Mike Schellenberg, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he is a journalist that writes about homelessness, and now he's been researching climate change for a long time. When he writes books about whatever subject it is he's working on at the time, he says, I don't ever say any politician's name or political party's name, because when you say things like Obama or Biden or Trump or Republican or Democrat, smart people get really stupid really fast. You know what I mean? Because for some reason they've intrinsically linked these external things that, by the way, don't give two fucks about them to their core identity. Right. And I like to have those conversations because I like to unwrap that shit from around people's identity. Like, this isn't who you are. This is something you believe, right? Talk to me about who you are. That's what I want to hear.
And like Jon Stewart, I thought was phenomenal. He's like, somehow we adopted this thing to where no matter who you voted for, like you have to be identified by the negative monolith associated with that, right?
Yeah.
So whether you voted for Biden and or Trump, like my cousin wrote me, because I voted for Trump, I had to be personified by every single negative trait that he had or could possibly have, rather than, right, I wanted something different in government.
Yeah, not because you wanted like a secure border and good foreign trade policy.
No,
just because they just quote him back to you.
Right, because I'm the heterosexual Christian white male and the bane of society.
All right, we're back again, boys. All sorts of editing to be done here. Anyways, yeah, it becomes, to me, that is a function of people wanting to be right, not wanting to get to the right answer.
Yeah, and it's them valuing their rightness over the relationship at hand.
Right, which it doesn't benefit anyone, right? One of my favorite authors and scientists was Carl Sagan, and he used to say that for me it's far greater to accept the universe as it is rather than persist in delusion, regardless of how gratifying it is. Because if the building catches on fire and I make a vision board that says I'm going to be okay in this room, well, guess what, bud? I'm going to die of smoke inhalation very fast. That's how that works, right? So, we're so comfortable. We're so uncomfortable with discomfort that we're comfortable with lying to ourselves about stuff. And that might be, nature has a way of weeding people out sometimes. It has a way of throwing some pestilence our way from time to time and shrinking populations, or maybe it's just coincidence. Who knows, right? But it happens. And maybe this is part of it. Maybe this strong men create soft times, create soft men is just something that we can't stop. And your goal should be to train hard men to make sure that your DNA propagates throughout the years, right?
Yeah, I honestly hope so, right? Matt Boudreaux, I don't know if you follow him, right? He's hit almost godlike status to me. Like, absolutely love it. And then, a few weeks ago, my 17-year-old was kind of not acting up in school, but just wasn't doing homework. And again, not bad work, because he's phenomenal, great intellect. Just got a case of the lazies, right? Wasn't doing homework. So his mom and I were kind of coming down on him and blah, blah, blah. And then very flippantly, he's like, well, I guess I'll just do what I'm told from here on out. I'm like, and then something, again, think about all these things that just kind of snapped him. I was like, yeah, like buckle up. Life hasn't begun to fuck you yet.
Yeah, I know,
right? I was like, hey, tell you what, take that advice, do whatever you're told, starting now for the next 70 years, and then die.
Right.
Do what you're told.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. I'm like, but it came up like, it was odd that that was the flippant comment. Like, yeah. Please, by all means, do what you're told.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of weird.
You need to learn that out, because I was like, I've got bosses. Your mom's got bosses, right? You kids are my bosses because you effectively tell me what to do to provide for the family.
Yeah. And it's why I like to, people talk about leading from the front a lot. And I think that's, to me, that idea is kind of passe. It's like it's wrapped in machismo. I like to subscribe.
That platitude shit.
Yeah, it's nonsense. I like to think of 360-degree leadership. No matter what I'm doing, where I am, there are people I'm responsible for, and that intrinsically makes you a leader. If you're aware enough to realize you're in a situation where other people depend on you, you are a leader. That's the end of the story, right? It doesn't matter what level of authority you have.
Right.
And unfortunately for us, competency and levels of authority don't really have any kind of ratio to one another. It's just kind of random, right? A lot of the time.
It really isn't. And sadly, from my limited experience, I'll go ahead and say that, but on the civilian side of things, is that people are promoted based off of technical competence rather than leadership prowess.
It's the Peter principle, right?
Right.
You've heard of that.
Yes.
It's like you rise to the level of your own incompetence, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
But just let's say you're an amazing computer programmer, right? So you're absolutely a rock star. Well, you get 100 people put underneath you. Your skill set may not be that you know how to lead 100 different people,
and you don't
through
necessarily,
no fault of your own,
right? And technical competency doesn't equal leadership.
Absolutely.
And you don't necessarily have to have technical expertise to be a leader on something. Like project management doesn't, like if you go take PMI, right? It doesn't teach you how to build and manage tech teams or industrial teams. It teaches you how to build and manage teams, right? And those lessons are applied ubiquitously depending on what you're doing. And I think that's why a lot of people coming out of the military, there's two reasons that I think they have a lot to offer outside of just consulting on TV to make sure it looks cool, right?
Right.
The leadership that's been tested is a big thing for me. And the confidence in your own leadership is that it's been put through the crucible. And then your competence to lead by example as well, which I think is a big part of that. People don't do things because they don't know they can do things.
Sure.
And when they see other people do them, typically what they try to do is shoot farther than that person. Think about like people that do stunts or tricks, like Travis Pastrana, for example. Saw Evel Knievel do some shit, and he's like, I can do better than that.
Right.
You know what I mean? And he did. Quite a bit better, as a matter of fact. So, Travis didn't have to tell anybody to follow. Evel Knievel didn't have to say, hey, kids, one day you can do this, because every kid that was watching was like, oh, shit, I want to do that. But they never would have even had that thought had he not done it.
You bet.
So that part of leadership and the ability to perform calmly and rationally when there's chaos all around you is probably the most important skill that you bring out of combat.
Completely.
Because it only takes group psychology is bizarre. It makes me think there's more going on than just what's going on inside of our heads. Like there's something additional going on, energy going between us. I mean, we know there's RFI flying around everywhere, but the way that people can sense each other being nervous and stuff, and how it will flow through the group, and you could see it sometimes flow through the group, and how one person saying, hey, get your fucking shit together, let's go, will end that shit immediately, right? I've seen that a lot, actually. And it's a skill, I guess, but it's also a gift to have acquired that skill, because you are now prepared to do things that most people can't do.
Sure.
Whether you've been in the military or a first responder of some sort, or had harrowing experiences, an ER doctor, whatever it is, when shit goes down, you can perform, right?
Right.
And you don't have to have that experience to perform. Some people just do it automatically. You never know what's going to happen until the bullets start flying. But to get a good group effort, the more people that know they can do shit, everybody else piggybacks off of that confidence.
Yeah.
And that's a huge gift. And it's probably something that comes across in your leadership classes quite a bit. Like people can't, if there's a bunch of like people that have never done anything in life selling business advice on the internet. It's like you got rich by telling other people how to get rich, but you never actually did anything.
Right.
But nobody can really question you and John Siak.
Yeah.
Or John Troxel.
John, it's funny because, God, there's like really so much to unpack with that entire statement. So, number one, like the cool thing that I like about what you said there is what you didn't say is like the best thing about the military is the discipline, because we may have mentioned this on the Drinking Bros before is that we were sold a bad bill of goods, right? In basic training, we're like, hey, we are an amazing military because we're going to teach you discipline. You're going to be a well-disciplined force. Yeah. Like, no. Ed, if you're still serving, listen up, right? Because that's not discipline, what you're taught. That's obedience.
Yeah, that's not the same thing.
And again, there's a time for obedience, right? On the battlefield, right? Combat direction. There's a time and a place for that.
But there's also the LGOP, the little group of paratrooper, right?
Yes.
A lot of people don't know about this stuff. I think we may have talked about it when you were on last, or we talked about it with somebody around that time. But as an infantryman, paratrooper, we hit the ground, and I've got 45 minutes to go kill everything I can find until I'm supposed to link up with my unit, right? So it's a little bit of organized chaos. It's almost like throwing a jab to get some standoff. You know what I mean? So you can maneuver and throw a punch. That's a very disciplined thing that happens right there, but it's complete chaos. It's not obedience. It's chaos. Right. You know what I mean? It's a good example of what you're talking about, and it's absolutely correct.
You know, and then like taking that further, or what happens, you know, in the outside, or why people like the military, or why military people are so successful. Again, your point is that, you know, if there's a urgent thing that happens at Black Rifle Coffee, I'm like, okay, I will get this done, right? I'm not getting shot at right now.
Yeah, I know, right? A little perspective is nice.
Right, and, again, and it's tough because like we can all say they're like, we're fine, or other people are coming unglued around us.
Well, people say it flippantly, but it's like, did you die?
Yeah, but did you?
You know what I mean? It's like, what is that?
It's a
the hangover. Yeah.
Ken Jeong.
Yeah.
You know, and it's absolutely spot on. Like, so other people are losing their mind and coming unglued. Like, we're gonna be fine.
So the lesson there, by the way, is that, like I said, it's a gift. Fucked up shit happens in life.
You bet.
And at all levels. It doesn't have to be like a mass casualty event or an emergency, like a weather emergency or something. Just when you see good order and discipline breaking down in whatever unit you're in, whether it's your community or your workplace or whatever it is, your family even, like you have the skills, whether you've thought about it in that context or not, you have the skills and the experience to be able to positively affect that situation and make sure good decisions are made. Instead of, you know, the political thing to do these days is to make really bad authoritarian decisions to stop stuff that we don't want to happen, right? Which is, you know, that's weakness. That's weakness. And it tears at the underbelly of our liberty.
And then it's in a military context, like I hate it, like something bad happens, so they write a policy letter.
Yeah, oh my God.
So like policies or organizational scar tissue. Some bad shit happens. I'll write a policy letter. This bad shit happened, so here's this letter saying this bad shit will never happen again. Like, but it doesn't capture all the variables.
Yeah.
So inevitably, it's really going to happen again. Or kind of the antithetical part to that is you hear it in the military, somebody screws up, and then the commander or senior enlisted makes a knee-jerk reaction. Like, what? Did they make a knee-jerk reaction, or did you lift their age up for them? Right? Because a lot of times we lift their leg up and force them to take action. Yeah. But we never hear that side of the argument, too.
Yeah, it's a good point. Before we get out of here, talk to me about what you're doing at Black Rifle.
Yeah, so Black Rifle, I'm sure a lot of the viewers are aware, amazing organization, went public early last year, February 10th of last year. So seeing amazing growth, and not just growth, but evolution of a company started by some amazing enlisted dudes, and now it's $1 billion organization ran by some amazing enlisted dudes. Yeah. Which is pretty fun. And so, I've been working in Black Rifle for a little over a year, was doing some strategic partnerships, working with influencers, recently building out their travel program, and now kind of moonlighting, just kind of augmenting the philanthropic side of Black Rifle with both corporate charitable giving and the Black Rifle Fund, and figuring out what we can do not only in 2023, but moving forward to give good, tangible help to veterans, first responders, law enforcement, fire, all that kind of stuff. And again, like we've been doing great work, and we handed out like $1.2 million last year. I think the last 2 years have been roughly that same number, and it's been amazing. But we're really trying to reinforce our efforts and give meat and good effort, growth, experience, understanding.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we've done, when I was involved with the organization, we did a lot of charity, you know, in the early days, but just in the last 2 years, I think you guys have met the same monetary amount that we did in the first 5 years of the company. You know what I mean? Which is great because it's always been about that. That's always been something, despite all the stupid bullshit that people on the internet say about whatever dumb thing is happening. You know, this Black Rifle, I mean, they're my friends, obviously, but I've worked there, but they've taken great pains to make sure that they give back wherever they could in ways that make sense to them, and I've always appreciated that.
You bet, and I think we're going to be a lot more deliberate this year in telling that story, right? So we've never wanted to make that the focus point. Not like we're doing anything for press,
Right,
or
yeah,
doing all
yeah,
that stuff,
yeah.
but at the end of the day, people aren't seeing the true benevolent nature of Black Rifle and what we've tangibly done and given back to the veterans. So stay tuned on all Black Rifle's social media, and you're going to see this year all the things that we've been doing, but now we're going to give you proof.
Okay. Do you got any examples of that? Just out of curiosity. I mean, I know the Veteran Adaptive Athlete thing is a big media event.
Yeah,
in the
Veteran
middle of the year.
Adaptive
Yeah.
Athlete Shoot that's happening here in April in San Antonio. That's going to be huge. We're going to try and maybe get different opportunities for that. You know, we've been sending approximately 40,000 bags a month-ish downrange to different people and units that request it. We did that. We helped support the World War I Memorial, the National World War I Memorial. That's in Kansas City, and that was sending them, you know, like $8,000 worth of coffee,
Right,
but
yeah.
just to let people there know that, hey, that memorial's not in DC, very, very overlooked, but we care about that history too.
Yeah.
And so really,
Well, that's
gonna
actually
double
the
down.
second time we've hit that place up because we originally sponsored the Missouri Mavericks,
Okay.
the hockey, like an ECHL hockey team there, and part of the proceeds went to that World War I
beautiful.
museum as well. As a matter of fact, Gary Stevens designed their hockey sweater for the game, the memorial game for that.
That's awesome.
It was dope. So yeah, we've been involved in that stuff for a long time, and it's like, you know, it's good to remember those things because that war especially sucked. That was like technology got to a level, but our tactics didn't reach that level, so people were in trenches just getting bombed with poison gas, basically, right?
It was unreal. And
I mean, that was hell on. Like when you think about some kind of dystopian situation with nuclear fallout in the atmosphere and stuff like that floating around, and people just getting radiation poisoning and dying where they stand. That's what World War I was in a lot of these places.
Europe was, and the civilian casualties were just catastrophic. And so if you're in Kansas City, Missouri, go to the Liberty Memorial, the National World War I Memorial there. It's absolutely phenomenal. But again, like, you know, we've got a list of, going back to the Black Rifle, as far as philanthropy, like 14 different organizations that right now I think we're kind of earmarked to give about $350,000 to, just those 14. But
Right.
again, not just, and again, and then we want it, like 65% of our efforts is going to go to support veteran owned and operated businesses.
Right.
And again, like we've been giving out checks, which is really great, but we really want to give them opportunity.
Yeah.
You want to give them enough
To build
money
something for themselves,
to
yeah.
build something
Yeah.
for themselves, and not necessarily in a venture capitalist type of way
Right.
as far as percentages, but give them to clear some obstacles
Yeah,
for
yeah,
them
yeah.
to really find success.
Teach a man to fish, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, look, I appreciate you coming on today. Is there anything else you'd like to share with these guys before we get out of here?
No, I appreciate everybody tuning in. These podcasts, I believe, are absolutely essential. Sadly, you have to do a lot more deliberate looking online in different areas to find this type of content. So I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm sorry, not just taking the time, but making the time to do this, to put out these great opportunities for people to glean information.
Yeah, well, we have a good time.
You bet.
And I like it's mostly for me, to be honest, because I like to know.
Fair.
But, you know, the byproduct is hopefully stuff that people like. Well, look, I appreciate you coming today. I'm sure you're busy, you got stuff to do. We're going to get out of here, but thanks for coming. Thank you all for listening. This has been Citizen.